The wind howled like a dying thing across the empty plains, tearing at the thin walls of Silas's cabin, a sound that had been his only companion for winters longer than he cared to count. Snow lay deep and unforgiving, burying the world in a silent white shroud, broken only by the relentless bite of the blizzard. He was a man carved from the same hard landscape, weathered and spare, his life reduced to the brutal simplicity of survival. Wood chopped, fire tended, scant food consumed. Loneliness was a quiet ache, a constant thrum beneath the surface of his days, acknowledged but never dwelled upon. It was simply the cost of living this far out, this isolated. The barn, a drafty, groaning structure older than the cabin itself, offered meager shelter for his few animals, a place of chores and rough necessity, not sanctuary. It was there, in the dim, frigid air thick with the scent of hay and manure, that Silas found her. Huddled in a corner, half buried in loose straw, was a girl. Small, gaunt, shivering uncontrollably despite being wrapped in a threadbare shawl. Her eyes, wide and dark in her pale face, fixed on him with an animal fear, a desperate, cornered look that stopped him mid-stride. She was a child, impossibly out of place, a fragile thing against the immense, brutal backdrop of the winter and his own solitary existence. How she had come to be there, miles from anywhere, was a question that froze in his throat, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable in that moment. The only sound was the moan of the wind outside and the ragged catch of her breath. Around her thin neck, tied with a piece of rough twine, hung something that glinted dully in the barn's sparse light. He approached slowly, carefully, not wanting to spook her further. Her body tensed, ready to bolt like a wild creature, but the cold and exhaustion held her captive. He knelt a safe distance away, his calloused hands held open, empty. He didn't speak, didn't know what words would fit this impossible scene. The air crackled with her fear and his own stunned silence. His gaze fell upon the object around her neck. It was a small, tarnished metal tag, like something you'd find on livestock or luggage. He reached out a hand, hesitant, towards the tag. She flinched but didn't pull away entirely. He carefully lifted the tag, turning it in his fingers. Scratched into the metal, crudely but legibly, were words. Clara, age 9. 50 cents. 50 cents. The price of something broken, unwanted, cast aside. The starkness of it hit him harder than the blizzard outside. It wasn't just a price. It was a verdict, a dehumanization so profound it felt like a physical blow. The girl, Clara, watched him, her gaze flickering between his face and the tag in his hand. He saw not just fear there, but a deep, ingrained sorrow that no child should possess. His own life had been hard, marked by loss and solitude, but this was a different kind of cold. He looked from the tag to her face, then back to the tag. The wind howled again, reminding them of the world's indifference, its inherent cruelty. He couldn't leave her there. The thought was immediate, primal, overriding the isolationist instincts of years. The barn offered no real protection from the elements, not long-term. Her chances out here were zero. His cabin, meager though it was, offered a stove, a roof that didn't leak snow, a chance. It wasn't charity. It felt more like a sudden, unexpected burden laid upon his stooped shoulders by the relentless hand of fate, or perhaps something that simply needed doing, a debt owed to the tattered remnants of his own humanity. He pushed himself to his feet, his joints protesting the cold. He extended a hand towards her, not demanding, just offering. "Come on," he said, his voice rough from disuse, barely a whisper against the wind. Inside her eyes searched his face, a flicker of uncertainty battling the ingrained fear. The tag, still in his hand, felt heavy, a tangible representation of the life she had been deemed worth. He didn't know what taking her in would mean, what complications it would bring to his solitary existence. But as he looked at her, a small, lost sparrow in the hawk's territory, the quiet resolve settled within him. He couldn't leave her to the storm. The cabin was small, one room dominated by a cast-iron stove that radiated the only real warmth in their world. Inside, The silence was less oppressive than the wind's shriek, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the soft sounds of breathing. Clara sat on a rough stool near the stove, wrapped in an old horse blanket Silas had retrieved from the barn. She was still, a small, fragile statue, her dark eyes observing him constantly, warily, like a wild animal trapped indoors. The tag still hung around her neck. He hadn't known what else to do with it. It felt wrong to remove it without her permission, wrong to let it stay. It was a marker of her past, a past he knew nothing of but suspected was etched with pain. He moved about the cabin, performing the familiar tasks, banking the fire, preparing a meager meal of dried beans and salt pork. He did it deliberately, predictably, letting his actions speak for him, hoping to build a fragile bridge of safety through routine. He offered her the plate of food. She hesitated, then took it with small, trembling hands, eating slowly, deliberately, as if every bite was precious, which out here it was. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. Her silence was profound, a deep well of unspoken trauma. He respected it, offering only quiet instruction or simple statements about the fire or the food. He didn't press her about the tag, about where she came from, about the 50 cents. Those questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, but they were less important than the immediate needs. Warmth, food, safety. A moment of respite from the relentless world that had priced her so cheaply. He ate his own meal across from her, the small table a vast space between them, filled with the weight of their separate, solitary lives colliding. He watched her subtly, noting the haunted look in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the thinness of her frame. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the rise and fall of the sun and the ebb and flow of the storm's intensity. The blizzard eventually subsided, leaving behind an even deeper blanket of snow and an isolation that felt absolute. Their routine solidified, a quiet, almost wordless rhythm. Silas chopped wood, tended the animals, hunted the scarce game when the weather allowed. Clara stayed mostly inside, watching, observing. She didn't offer to help at first, and he didn't ask. He saw the exhaustion in her, the lingering fear, the slow thawing from the deep freeze she had been in. He left the tag around her neck. It remained a stark, brutal reminder, but also, perhaps, a strange anchor for her. He occasionally caught her fingering it, her gaze distant. Slowly, tentatively, the first tendrils of trust began to sprout. It was not through grand gestures or heartfelt conversations. There were none. It was in small things. The way she stopped flinching when he moved suddenly. The way her gaze, while still watchful, lost some of its sharp fear and held a flicker of curiosity. The day she quietly folded the blanket she always kept around her, placing it neatly on the stool. The day she reached out a small hand to touch the rough fur of his old dog, who had cautiously accepted her presence. He saw these as monumental shifts, tiny cracks appearing in the wall she had built around herself. He responded in kind, not with words, but with consistency, with predictable safety. He made sure the fire was always warm, that there was always food, meager though it was. He left the cabin door unlatched when he went out, a silent statement that she was not a prisoner, that she was free to leave if she wished, though where she would go in this frozen wilderness was an unthinkable question. He never raised his voice, never made demands. He simply existed, a quiet, steady presence in a world that had shown her only harshness. The cabin, once just a shell for his own solitude, began to feel different, warmer in a way that had nothing to do with the stove. It wasn't emptiness it held anymore. It was the fragile, silent space between two lost souls beginning, tentatively, to breathe the same air. The quiet rhythm of their lives was broken not by a change in the weather, but by the distant sound of an engine. It was a sound utterly alien in this vast, silent landscape, a mechanical intrusion that shattered the illusion of their perfect isolation. Silas, outside mending a fence post, straightened slowly, his body tensing. His gaze swept the horizon, squinting against the glare of the snow. A plume of black smoke marred the clean white line where the sky met the earth. A vehicle was approaching. Out here, in the depths of winter, miles from any main track. This could only mean trouble. No one came this way unless they had a specific, often unwelcome, purpose. His first thought was of Clara. He hadn't told anyone about her. He hadn't even been to the nearest town, a cluster of rough buildings 2 days' ride away, since finding her. Her presence was a secret, one he hadn't consciously decided to keep, but that felt increasingly vital to protect. He went inside the cabin, his movements swift and silent. Clara looked up from where she sat near the stove, her eyes immediately picking up on the shift in his demeanor. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had fisted at his sides. He didn't need to explain. The unnatural sound carried faintly through the cabin walls, a harbinger of the outside world they had both, in their own ways, sought to escape. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and rough. It wasn't a request. She nodded, her gaze fixed on his face. He saw the fear return to her eyes, the old, deep-seated fear, but beneath it, something new, a flicker of shared apprehension, a silent question about what this intrusion meant for them. He grabbed his rifle, checking the action with practiced ease. He didn't relish confrontation, but he wouldn't shy from it, especially not now. He stepped back outside, positioning himself near the cabin, partially hidden by the woodpile. The vehicle was closer now, a dark shape against the snow. As it drew nearer, he could make out details. A beat-up truck, its tires struggling against the drifts. 2 men inside. Not locals he recognized. His grip tightened on the rifle. The truck finally ground to a halt 100 yards from the cabin, the engine dying with a final cough. 2 men emerged, bundled in coats, their faces hard and unfamiliar. One was larger, bulkier, the other leaner, with sharp, darting eyes. They stood for a moment, scanning the small homestead, before beginning to walk towards him. Silas waited, letting them cover the distance. When they were still some 20 yards away, he raised the rifle, holding it steady, pointed not directly at them, but as a clear, unmistakable warning. "Hold it right there," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. The men stopped. The larger one squinted at him. "We're looking for someone," he yelled back, his voice rough and impatient. "Heard there was a girl out this way. Run away, Clara." The word hung in the air, a confirmation of his fear. They knew, or suspected. The price tag around her neck, the implied transaction. It all clicked into place. A dark, ugly picture. He didn't lower the rifle. "Ain't no girl here," he stated flatly. The leaner man laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Come on now, old-timer. We know you got her. 9 years old, answers to Clara. Little thing. Got a mark around her neck, they say, the mark around her neck. Not the tag, but the faint line it would leave on her skin. The price, the mark, the hunt." A wave of cold fury washed over Silas, colder than the snow. They saw her as property, identifiable by her flaws, something to be reclaimed. He looked past them, towards the empty, silent plains. This world was cruel, but these men were a different kind of cruel, the kind that put prices on souls. He wouldn't let them have her. Not now. Not ever. Inside the cabin, Clara would be listening, her small body coiled with tension. He had become her protector not by choice, but by circumstance, and now, by a fierce, quiet determination that surprised even himself. The moment had come, and the solitary man who had found a lost girl in his barn was ready to face whatever came next. The 2 men exchanged a glance, annoyance hardening their features. The larger man took a step forward. "Look, mister, that girl belongs to someone. We're just here to collect what's owed." "She don't belong to no one," Silas said, his voice low and steady, the rifle unwavering. "And she ain't here," the leaner man scoffed. "Don't play coy. A man like you, alone out here. What do you want with a girl?" Unless he trailed off, a sneer spreading across his face, implying something foul and unspeakable. Silas felt a surge of pure, cold rage. He didn't need to say anything more. His posture, the set of his jaw, the way he held the rifle, it was a clear declaration. They would not pass. Seeing the unyielding resolve in his stance, The larger man's hand went inside his coat. Silas reacted instantly. He didn't want to kill them, but he would if he had to. He fired a shot not at the men, but into the snow at their feet. The report echoed across the stillness, sharp and violent. Snow exploded upwards. The men recoiled, startled. "Get off my land," Silas ordered, his voice a low growl. Now, for a tense moment, they hesitated, weighing the risk. Silas was an unknown quantity, clearly willing to use force, and the vastness of the snow-covered land stretched around them, promising no easy escape if things went wrong. They weren't expecting armed resistance from a solitary rancher. They exchanged another look, defeat warring with frustration. Finally, the larger man grunted. "This ain't over," he muttered. But they turned and trudged back towards their truck. Silas watched them until they were inside. The engine sputtered to life, and the vehicle slowly, painfully, turned around in the deep snow and headed back the way it came, leaving the unnatural silence to descend once more. He stayed out there for a long time, watching until the smoke plume vanished entirely from the horizon, ensuring they were truly gone. The cold seeped into his bones, but he barely noticed. When he finally went back inside, the cabin felt smaller, warmer, fuller than it ever had. Clara was standing by the stove, her face pale but her eyes fixed on him, searching. The fear was still there, but now it was mingled with something else, relief, certainly, but also a dawning understanding of what he had done, of the line he had drawn for her. He leaned the rifle against the wall and met her gaze. He didn't say anything about the men, didn't explain. There was no need. She knew. In the quiet aftermath, something fundamental shifted between them. The tentative trust solidified, deepened into a bond forged in shared danger. The price tag, still around her neck, no longer felt like a marker of her worth, but a scar from a past that no longer defined her. She was Clara, the girl he had protected, the girl who had brought a quiet light into his solitary world. He saw the resilience bloom in her, shedding the vulnerability like a chrysalis. She started to help, small tasks at first, sweeping the floor, feeding the chickens, her movements gaining confidence, losing the haunted hesitancy. She still didn't speak much, but her silence was no longer empty. It was filled with presence, with observation, with a quiet strength emerging. Silas's life was irrevocably changed. The loneliness was still a part of the landscape, but it was no longer the dominant feature. He was no longer just surviving. He was living with a purpose beyond himself. He had taken in a child deemed worth 50 cents by the cruel world, and in doing so, he had found something invaluable. She had filled the empty spaces in his life not with noise, but with quiet presence, with a shared humanity that the harsh environment had tried to strip away. They were an unlikely pair, the stoic cowboy and the silent girl with a price tag, but they were a unit, bound by circumstance and choice. The world outside remained harsh, judgmental, potentially threatening. But inside the small cabin, against the vast indifference of the winter, they had built their own small world, warmed by a fire that was now more than just burning wood. It was the slow, steady burn of resilience, of hope, of a quiet, profound connection found in the most unexpected place. The tag remained, a reminder, but the value it represented was long forgotten. Clara was worth everything, and Silas, in protecting her, had finally found his own worth in the desolate, beautiful, unforgiving land.